Have you ever wondered what really happens in the exact moment your heart stops beating? What your soul sees when your body is no longer breathing? Most people believe death is silence, a black void, a cold ending. But for some, those who have returned from what doctors call clinical death, there's something much more terrifying and deeply spiritual. This isn't just another story. This is a near-death experience that shattered every belief I ever had about life, death, and what waits for us beyond. I died. Yes. For minutes, I was gone. My heart flatlined. My body was lifeless on a hospital bed. But my soul was somewhere else entirely. I didn't see a tunnel of light. I didn't hear angels sing. I was thrown into a darkness so thick, so suffocating, it felt like my very essence was being peeled away. This was not peace. This was not rest. This was judgment. And just when I thought I was completely alone in that place, surrounded by screams, shadows, and a crushing guilt, I couldn't explain. He appeared, but not in glory, not with power. He stood there, in that darkness, and he was crying. Jesus was crying, for me. His tears weren't of rage or disappointment. They were sorrow, grief, as if he was mourning what I had become, what I had done, and what I almost lost forever. I still don't have all the answers, but what I saw, what I felt in those few moments between life and eternal separation, will stay with me until my final breath. So I have to ask you, if the Son of God looked into your soul, would he cry? Would he turn away? Or would he still reach for you? This is not a video for casual viewers. This is for those who are searching, for those who feel something deeper calling them. If you've ever asked, is hell real? What happens after we die? Or can someone return from death with a message from the other side? Then don't scroll away. You're not here by accident. You're here for a reason. Tell me in the comments. Do you believe near-death experiences are real? Have you or someone you know ever gone through one? And if you're brave enough to go deeper, subscribe now, because the next few minutes might change the way you see everything, forever. I wasn't always the kind of man who believed in heaven, hell, or anything in between. Honestly, I thought I had everything figured out. I had my plans, my pace, my priorities. Life for me was about survival, not salvation. I wasn't religious. I didn't believe in any higher power watching over us. I believed in what I could see, what I could earn, what I could build. God? He was just a name people used when they couldn't explain the darkness inside them. I didn't need that. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I lived fast. I worked hard. And I numbed every doubt with distractions. Money, noise, late nights, short highs. My version of peace was silence I controlled. I didn't want to think too much, because deep down, I knew something was off. There was a quiet ache I could never fully shake, an emptiness I'd laugh off with friends, ignore with headphones, or drown in routine. I thought it was normal. Everyone feels lost sometimes, right? But this was different. It wasn't just loneliness. It was like something in me was slowly dying, long before my heart ever stopped. The truth is, I was afraid, not of death itself, but of meaninglessness, of the idea that this was all there is, that everything we do, every tear, every touch, every failure, is just dust. So I buried that fear. I mocked those who spoke of the soul. I rolled my eyes at people who claimed to feel called. I thought they were weak, superstitious. I felt strong for not needing faith. But now I see what strength really is. I had secrets, things I did, things I thought, things I never told anyone. I pretended to be in control, but in reality, I was fractured. Guilt followed me like a shadow, and no matter how much I tried to hide it, I felt it every time I was alone. I made mistakes. I hurt people I loved. I said things I couldn't take back. And still, I convinced myself I was a good man, because I wasn't as bad as others. I didn't realize the comparison game was just a mask for denial. When I was younger, I had questions. I used to wonder about God, the afterlife, purpose, but I didn't get answers, just silence, and I grew bitter. I stopped asking. I stopped caring. I figured if there was a God, he had given up on me a long time ago, so I gave up first. Looking back, I can see the warnings. I can remember moments that didn't make sense. Dreams, close calls, feelings I couldn't explain. I brushed them off. Coincidences, luck, stress, anything but spiritual, anything but divine. I became skilled at ignoring the quiet voice, the one that whispered late at night asking, "Is this all you want your life to be?" I ignored it, over and over, until it stopped asking. And still, I knew. I knew I was drifting. I knew I wasn't okay. But pride is a powerful drug. It makes you deaf to grace. Then one day, life snapped. It didn't ask for permission. One second I was fine, and the next, my chest collapsed inward. Pain shot through me like lightning. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone. I remember the ground rushing up to meet me, the panic in the eyes of strangers, the sirens, the cold floor beneath my back, and then, nothing. The doctors later said my heart stopped for several minutes. I had died, but what they couldn't explain was where I went. Because when the machine stopped and the world faded, my story didn't end. It began. I didn't float in peace. I didn't see a tunnel. I fell into darkness, heavy, thick, like I was being pulled through a place made of sorrow, the kind of sorrow that has a voice. And in that place, I remembered everything, every lie, every missed chance, every time I said, maybe later, when I knew better. I wasn't standing in front of fire. I was standing in the truth of my own choices. I had never felt so exposed, so known. It was like my soul was being unzipped. There were no excuses left. No one to blame. No masks. Just me. And then, him. Jesus. I never expected to see him. I didn't believe he existed. I had mocked his name. And yet, there he was. Not in judgment. Not in anger. But in tears. He cried. And the moment I saw those tears shed for me, I broke. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood. I understood what I had done. Not just to myself, but to the one who had never stopped waiting. Those tears carried a weight I'll never forget, and in them, I saw a love I never deserved. It happened faster than I could process. One moment I was upright, functioning, living inside my daily routine, and the next, something invisible slammed into my chest. A tightness, sharp and paralyzing, as if my entire chest cavity had been locked in a vice. My hand shot up instinctively, gripping at my shirt, searching for relief, but there was none. I couldn't breathe. My lungs refused to fill. The edges of my vision began to fade, tunneling inward. Sound became muffled, like I was slipping beneath deep water, sinking into silence. People were shouting. I could see their mouths moving, but I couldn't hear them anymore. I collapsed. My knees hit the ground, then my back. The cold floor pressed against me like ice. I was aware of hands touching me, shaking me, trying to revive me, but their efforts felt far away, like echoes through a thick wall. Everything started to feel distant, as though I were being pulled out of my own body. Panic surged for a brief second, and then it all stopped. No more noise, no more pain, no more pressure, just stillness. But it wasn't peace. It was absence. It was nothingness, not the restful kind. It was the kind of void that made your soul ache for sound, for presence, for anything at all. I had always imagined death as a kind of release, maybe even gentle. But this was a blackout that felt like I had fallen into the crack between time and existence. My body had given up, and yet something in me remained, conscious, aware, floating in the thick silence of non-being. The hospital room, the bright lights, the beeping machines, the voices, all vanished. There was no tunnel, no light, just endless black. It wasn't colorless. It was oppressive, like the darkness had weight. It pressed against me from every side. I couldn't see my hands, couldn't hear my breath. I wasn't sure I even had a body anymore. It was as if I had become a point of awareness in the middle of an eternal void. I remember trying to scream, not with words, not with lungs, but with whatever was left of me. I wanted to know if anyone could hear me, if anyone was there, but the silence that answered was so complete, it felt alive. And then came the cold. Not the cold of winter or air conditioning or metal. This was spiritual cold, a kind of chill that passed through whatever I was in that moment, soul, spirit, energy, and clung to the core of my being. It didn't just touch me, it inhabited me. I began to feel stripped, like every mask I'd worn in life, every illusion I had built about myself, was being peeled away, layer by layer, until only the truth remained. And the truth was raw, exposed. I was defenseless. I thought about my family, my friends, but their faces slipped away. I couldn't hold on to anything. My memories began to unravel like threads pulled from an old cloth. What mattered didn't matter anymore. All the achievements, the pride, the ego, none of it followed me into that place. All that remained were my choices, my real choices, the things I had done when no one was watching, the words I had spoken that wounded others, the lies I told to protect myself, the pride I carried like armor. I didn't hear voices, not yet, but I felt watched, not by something comforting, but by something ancient, immense, and disappointed. It was as if the darkness itself had eyes, and in those unseen stares, I felt naked, judged, not by accusation, but by contrast. I was being measured against something I had rejected my whole life. There was no clock, no sense of time, but somehow I knew this moment, this place, was not neutral. It was not passive, it was waiting. And whatever came next depended on something more than luck or chance. It depended on truth. At some point, a low hum began to rise, faint at first, like a vibration deep beneath the surface. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't musical, it was more like a groan that came not from outside, but from within the void itself, as if the very space I was in was reacting to me, judging me, recognizing me. Then I felt pulled, not physically, but spiritually. It was as if the weight of my life had gravity, and it was dragging me somewhere deeper. I tried to resist. I remember wanting to fight. I remember willing myself to go back, to wake up, to scream for help, but there was no body to scream with, no breath to gasp. I was a soul being pulled into judgment, and I knew it. And just before I sank further, just before the darkness began to twist into shape, just before I could see what waited in the shadows, there was a pause, a break in the pull, as if something else had noticed me too, something greater, something that hadn't given up yet, but it wasn't comforting. Not yet, not even close. Before you continue with this content that shows you what it's like to stand face to face with eternal judgment, you need to check out the ebook, Secrets of NDE Life. This book reveals deep teachings from the scriptures, truths long forgotten by many, lessons that will strengthen your faith, restore your spirit, and help you understand God's path, even in your darkest moments. It's not just another book, it's a warning, a spiritual map for those who feel on the edge, between faith and emptiness, between the calling and the abyss. You don't have to wait for a life-altering wake-up call to open your eyes. After this video, click the link in the description and begin your spiritual turnaround today, because tomorrow might be too late. Something shifted. The silence cracked. It wasn't a loud sound, more like pressure changing around me. Like the very fabric of the space I was in began to thin, to stretch. I felt movement. Slow, deliberate. Not mine. Something else. It was as if the atmosphere itself was alive. That's when I realized the ground beneath me. It wasn't solid. It wasn't stone or soil or any material I'd known in life. It pulsed. It trembled, like it was breathing under my weight. And I felt it. I felt it reacting to me, almost like it knew I didn't belong there yet, but it was getting ready to accept me. The texture was sickening, not rough, not smooth. It felt damp, porous, sticky, and warm, like I was standing barefoot on rotting flesh. I wanted to recoil, to lift my feet, but I had no body to command. I wasn't walking, I was simply there, hovering, feeling, absorbing everything around me. The darkness started to shift into form. Shapes, twisted, misshapen, emerged from the black, but they weren't clear. They moved like smoke, but with purpose. They stayed just out of view, yet close enough for me to sense their hunger. And then came the smell. Not one, but layers of odor, each more repulsive than the last. Rotting meat, burned hair, sulfur, a sweetness so sickly it felt wrong, unnatural. It clung to my awareness, burrowed into whatever part of me still held memory. I could taste it, like every bitter regret I'd ever swallowed had taken form in the air around me. I wanted to breathe, to cough, to escape, but there was no air, just sensation. raw, unfiltered spiritual sensation. I wasn't alone. The moment I realized this, the atmosphere thickened, like eyes I couldn't see locked onto me from every direction. The shadows weren't just there, they were aware. They moved with intention. They circled slowly, never touching, but never backing away. I didn't hear words, but I understood them. Thoughts, not my own, began to creep into my mind. Accusations, whispers, mockery, each one coated in a venom that sank into my being. You thought no one saw you. You laughed at faith. You wasted your breath. You were given time, and this is what you chose. The voices weren't loud. They were intimate, too close, like someone whispering just behind your ear in an empty room. I turned, if turning is what you could call it in that state, but there was nothing, just darkness and motion swirling in, patterns that made no sense. And yet, I felt eyes that pierced straight through me, not with curiosity, but with contempt. I felt exposed, not just physically, but spiritually. Every thought I'd ever buried, every lie I'd told myself, every selfish act I tried to justify, it all lay bare. I was known in a way I didn't know was possible, not judged by external rules, but by internal truth. My truth, the one I spent years suppressing. I wasn't being punished, I was being shown, and the showing was unbearable. Somewhere, in the periphery of that void, shapes began to form more clearly. Figures. They were tall but distorted, limbs too long, faces wrong, twisted in expressions that felt rehearsed, as if they mimicked human emotion, but lacked the soul behind it. They didn't speak, but their presence screamed. Each step they took made the ground under me ripple, like a drop of poison hitting still water. And then came the screaming, not from them, from around them. It echoed, from all directions, but never from a visible source. Thousands, maybe millions of screams layered over each other. Male, female, young, old. Some cries were raw and panicked, others were guttural and full of hatred. It was a chorus of despair, but the terrifying part, I recognized some of the voices, not names, just familiarity. People I'd known, passed by, lived with, people whose suffering now joined that endless soundscape. It was then I understood. This place was not empty. It was full of those like me, people who never thought they'd end up here, people who dismissed the warnings, who traded eternity for convenience. I had become one of them, not condemned by accident, but by default. I had chosen to live without light, and now I had found the result. The space around me began to close in. The breathing ground surged again. I felt it rising, licking at my soul like fire without flame. The air, if I could call it that, was growing heavier. Each moment dragged like a chain, through molasses. There was no time, and yet, every second stretched into an eternity. I began to lose track of who I was, my name, my life. Everything began to erode under the pressure of that place. The entities circled closer, still watching, still waiting. And somewhere within that tension, I felt something deeper awaken in the space. Something worse than the hate, worse than the smell, worse than the cold. It was despair, not emotional but spiritual, the kind that comes when you realize there is no hope here, that this place was never meant for transformation, only recognition, final recognition of a life misused, and I couldn't change it, not from there. And just as I began to slip into that surrender, into the full acceptance that I was forgotten, a new presence entered the space, not light, not warmth, but authority. The shadows froze, the air shifted again, and I felt something stir above me, something greater than the darkness, not threatening, not cruel, but overwhelmingly holy. I felt them before I saw them. The atmosphere shifted again, but this time, it wasn't weight, it was presence. Like the air itself bent inward, the shadows that had circled me now parted slightly, as if something more ancient, more vile, more dominant was stepping forward. It wasn't footsteps I heard, not exactly. It was a sliding sound, like something dragging itself across the ground, leaving behind a trail of dread in its wake. My awareness flinched, instinctively recoiling, but there was nowhere to go. In that place, escape was never an option, only exposure. Then came the laughter, soft at first, almost childlike. then layered. One voice, then another, then dozens, hundreds, all laughing, not with joy but mockery. It was cold, intelligent laughter. They knew me. I don't mean they recognized me. I mean they knew me, my history, my failures, my secrets. The kind of knowing that strips you bare, not just in body, but in soul. They didn't speak in sentences. They whispered, and every whisper hit like a blade against my being. Remember what you said to her that night? Thought no one heard what you did alone in the dark. You played the good man well, but we saw. You never meant that apology, did you? You knew you were wrong, and you laughed anyway. The voices weren't coming from different beings. They were one voice fractured into many mouths, echoes of accusations, condemnations that weren't new. They were familiar. They were mine. Words I'd spoken, thoughts I'd buried, acts I'd justified. They rose from the depths and stood before me like demons wearing the skin of memory. And then I saw them. Figures emerged from the smoky dark. Some tall and thin, their limbs stretched unnaturally, bending in ways human joints were never meant to bend. Others were hunched, massive, their faces hidden by layers of what looked like torn fabric and rotting flesh. Their eyes glowed, not with fire, but with intention. They didn't blink. They didn't need to. They saw without light. And when their gaze fell upon me, I felt my soul recoil like a child facing a punishment he knew he deserved. One came close. Its form flickered. One moment it was a tall male figure in a dark robe. The next, a mirror of someone I had once hated. And then, it shifted again, into me. Not who I was in life, but who I had become in soul. Twisted, hollow, mocking. It smiled. But that smile wasn't human. It was stretched, too wide, split by jagged lines that weren't lips, but cracks in its skin. It whispered something only I could hear. You thought death would forget, but we don't forget. We never forget. Behind it, other shapes circled, and inside the blur of their forms, I saw faces, not theirs, mine. Pieces of my past embedded in them. People I had hurt, people I had abandoned. Their eyes empty, but staring directly into me. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than screams. It was shame embodied, and the ground beneath me responded. It pulsed. Again, this time with rhythm, like a heartbeat, but not mine. The heartbeat of the place itself, a rhythm of torment, of suffering. With every pulse, the atmosphere changed. The stench thickened. The cold deepened. The shadows grew longer. They moved closer. One of them pointed, an arm that looked more like a twisted root than a limb. And as it did, I felt a heat rise from beneath the ground. But it wasn't fire. It was guilt. Pure, unrelenting guilt. The kind that doesn't just sting, it devours. I felt myself collapsing inward, as if my spirit, unsupported by repentance or redemption, was caving under its own weight. And then came the scream. Not from me, not from them. It was above us, beyond us. A sound so loud it made the others pause just for a moment. It was like someone had torn through the fabric of reality and screamed through the rip. A scream not of pain, but rage. Ancient rage. It shook the ground. It silenced the laughter. And in its echo the beings began to chant. Not words, but tones. Deep, rumbling, dissonant. It wasn't music. It was hatred given sound. I began to understand. These entities weren't just tormentors. They were recorders, reflectors. They didn't create the pain. They revealed it. They didn't need to invent punishment. My own life had already prepared it. They were the mirror I had refused to look into. And now I had no choice. One of them stepped forward again. It didn't speak this time. It only stared. And in its eyes, I saw me, not as I remembered myself, but as I truly was. A soul starving for truth, twisted by pride, hollowed by excuses, covered in the residue of 1,000 ignored chances to change. I tried to cry, but in that place tears don't exist. Grief exists, but it has no outlet. It festers, it grows, it becomes the air you breathe, the water you drown in. And just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, something happened. The darkness around the entities rippled. Their forms began to blur again, but this time they weren't shifting into new horrors. They were reacting, pulling back slightly, not in fear, but in recognition, because something else had entered the space, something they hated. Something began to break, first in the air, then in the ground, and finally, in me. It wasn't violent. It was subtle, like a note out of tune in an orchestra of torment. A soft resistance, barely noticeable, but undeniable. The entities around me froze, not all at once, but one by one, as if they felt something approaching, something they couldn't control. Their chanting fell silent. Their twisted bodies shivered, not with fear, but with something deeper, reverence mixed with resentment. The darkness didn't vanish. It trembled. The thick fog that surrounded everything began to pull back, not in retreat, but in reverence. It was like creation itself was holding its breath, and in that stillness, I felt it before I saw it. A presence, a light that didn't come with fire or thunder or noise. It came quietly, but its arrival pierced every part of me. It wasn't just light. It was a presence so powerful, so holy. It demanded the full attention of everything it touched. And yet, it didn't demand. It invited. At first, I couldn't see him. The light wasn't blinding. It was pure. My awareness strained to adjust. Not my eyes. They no longer mattered. It was my soul that struggled to comprehend what stood before me. And then, through that radiance, I saw him, not as the world paints him, not as a distant judge or a symbolic figure, but as a man, a divine man, radiating sorrow, compassion, authority, and something I hadn't felt since arriving in that place, mercy. He didn't speak, not yet. He just stood there, a few steps away from me. The ground that had once pulsed with torment stilled beneath him. The entities that had tortured me stood back, not vanquished, but silenced, exposed to the presence of someone infinitely greater than themselves. They hated him. I could feel it. Their silence was thick with hatred, but none dared move, none dared approach, because in him there was power they could not corrupt. And still, he cried. He looked at me, not at the beings, not at the void, not at my failures, at me, directly. And as his gaze met mine, I collapsed internally, not from fear, but from realization. In those eyes I saw every chance I'd wasted, every door I'd closed, every time he had called, and I turned away. There was no anger in his expression, only pain, deep, divine sorrow. Not the sorrow of someone who was surprised by my condition, but of someone who had always known where my path was leading and still loved me through every step of it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point a finger. He didn't accuse. He just cried. And in that moment, those tears shattered something in me that torment never could. Pain didn't break me. Fire didn't break me. Guilt didn't break me. But those tears, they did, because they came from a place of such purity, such unbearable love that I couldn't understand why they were meant for me. He stepped closer. With every step, the darkness retreated just slightly more. Not in fear, but in submission. His presence rewrote the laws of that place. And as he neared, I felt every lie I had ever believed start to unravel. The lie that I was too far gone, that no one cared, that my sins defined me, that my failures disqualified me, that God had given up on me. They began to disintegrate, not because of doctrine or argument, but because he stood there in the middle of my torment and wept. I wanted to speak, to beg, to scream for forgiveness, but I couldn't. I wasn't worthy of words. I was barely holding on to the scraps of my own identity. And yet, he saw me, not what I had become, but who I was created to be. And in his eyes, I saw not only sorrow, but hope. Somehow, impossibly, he hadn't given up on me. His tears weren't weakness. They were war, a silent war against everything that held me, against the chains I had wrapped around myself, against the accusations whispered in the dark, against the despair that had settled into my soul like rot. Each tear felt like a blade of light, cutting through layers of darkness I didn't even know were there. He reached out, not with haste or urgency, but with deliberate, sacred intention. And as his hand extended toward me, the shadows behind me hissed, not with fear of him, but with fury that I might respond, that I might accept, that I might choose light, Even now, I didn't deserve him. I knew that. But he wasn't there because I deserved. He was there because he loved. Because love is not limited by worth. It is revealed in the face of worthlessness. And in that place, in that moment, I saw the true nature of love. Not as a feeling, not as a contract, but as a person. And he had come. For me. Still, he hadn't spoken. And yet, his silence said everything. His eyes told me things words never could. That he remembered every prayer I never prayed. Every time I mocked those who believed in him. Every time I saw suffering and walked away. And yet, here he was. In the darkest moment of my existence, he showed up. And not to punish, but to mourn. The ground between us felt sacred, untouchable. And I stood there, suspended in the weight of a love that made no sense. A love that wept for me when no one else would. That entered hell itself, not in wrath, but in grief. Because to him, I mattered, even here, especially here. For a moment, everything stood still. The darkness no longer moved, no longer breathed. The entities that once circled me like vultures now lingered at a distance, unable to approach, but unwilling to retreat. Their presence had become almost insignificant compared to what stood before me. Jesus. He didn't have to say a word. His tears had spoken louder than all the screams that had echoed through that place. I was still in the depths of something I couldn't name, something beyond the understanding of any theology or science. And yet, I felt that something had shifted, not in the place, in me. I didn't know what was about to happen, but I could feel it in every part of my being. Something was being pulled apart and stitched back together at the same time. There was no warning, no signal, just a sudden jolt, not physical, but spiritual, like a rope had been tied around my soul, and someone, somewhere, began to pull, slowly at first, then with more urgency. I looked at him one last time. Still, he hadn't spoken. But his eyes, his expression, his presence, everything in him said, not yet, but now you know. And just like that, I was ripped from the place. Not walked out, not escorted. I was yanked, violently and abruptly, through layers of sensation, memory, and awareness. It felt like passing through every regret I had ever buried, every emotion I had ever silenced. I couldn't hold on to anything, not even his gaze. And that terrified me, because part of me didn't want to leave him behind. Part of me knew I would never be the same again. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, a single beep, then another, then a rapid sequence of tones I couldn't identify. I tried to open my eyes, but I didn't have to. Light burned through my eyelids, harsh, white, clinical. And then came the voices, urgent, overlapping, desperate. He's back. Pulse is stabilizing. Clear the way. Keep him conscious. The words barely made sense. They echoed inside my skull like fragments of a broken dream. My body, heavy like lead, refused to respond. I tried to move my fingers. Nothing. I tried to speak. My throat was fire. Every breath felt like I was inhaling flames, and yet I was breathing. I was breathing. The lights above me shifted as I was rolled down a corridor. My head, strapped in place, bounced slightly with each turn of the gurney. Nurses, doctors, all moving with rehearsed precision, their eyes focused on monitors, IVs, oxygen masks. None of them looked at me with recognition. To them, I was just another code blue. Another miracle, maybe. But to me, they were the first humans I'd seen after facing eternity. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to scream, "Do you know what's on the other side?" But the words couldn't form. My tongue was dry. My lips cracked. My thoughts were jumbled. All I could do was cry. Silent tears ran down my face, unnoticed amid the chaos. But I wasn't crying from pain. I was crying because I knew what I had escaped. I knew what I had seen, and I knew I had been given something I didn't deserve. Time lost meaning. Minutes, hours, maybe days passed. Machines beeped. IVs dripped. Tubes fed air into my lungs. Every sensation was foreign, and yet familiar. My body ached. My mind raced. But through the fog of medication and exhaustion, a question burned inside me. Why me? Why had I been allowed to return when so many others were trapped? What did he see in me that I had never seen in myself? I wasn't a good man. I had lived for myself. I had ignored every sign, silenced every warning, laughed at every truth, and still, he came for me. Still, he cried for me. Still, he pulled me back. My family visited. Friends came. Nurses smiled. But no one truly understood what had happened. They saw a man who had survived a near-fatal cardiac arrest, a medical anomaly, a second chance. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel what I felt. They didn't hear the screams, or see the shadows, or witness the Son of God shedding tears in a place where hope shouldn't exist. I was quiet at first, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't have the words. How do you explain to someone that hell is real, and so is love, that torment exists, and yet mercy can still reach you in the middle of it? How do you look someone in the eyes and say, I was dead, and I saw him? The hospital room was sterile, beeps, hums, distant conversations. But inside me, a storm raged. My heart beat not just from electricity, but from something new, something sacred. I wasn't just alive. I was awakened, reborn not in body, but in soul. And yet, I felt the weight of what I had seen, a burden and a blessing. Each night I closed my eyes. I returned to fragments of that place, not in dreams, but in flashes. A sound, a smell, a voice. Sometimes I'd wake up in sweat, grasping for the presence that had stood before me, wishing I could see his face again, just once more. But I knew better. He had already done more than enough. He had already spoken, without a single word. After the machines, after the masks and monitors, after the prayers I couldn't yet say and the tears I couldn't stop, came the silence. The kind that isn't empty, but full of questions, full of awareness, full of something sacred pressing into every moment. I wasn't the same. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. All I knew was this: I had come back. I had seen what waits beyond death. I had been touched by something greater than words, and I could never go back to who I was before. Every breath felt like a second chance. Not the cliché kind, not some vague new beginning. I mean a literal spiritual extension of mercy. A mercy I did not deserve. A mercy I could feel in the rhythm of my heartbeat, in the stillness of my thoughts, in the way I now looked at people and saw more than faces. I saw souls. Before all this, I lived for myself. Everything was about achievement, validation, control. But now, I couldn't even sit in silence without weeping, not out of sadness, but out of realization. Every small thing felt divine. The way sunlight passed through a curtain, the sound of laughter echoing from a child nearby, the way my mother looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I had almost lost all of it. I had almost been sealed away in eternal darkness. And now that I knew what that darkness truly was, I couldn't stop seeing the light in everything. I started to change, not out of duty, but out of necessity. I couldn't walk past suffering anymore. I couldn't ignore injustice. I couldn't stay silent when people around me spoke as if life ends with death. I started speaking gently at first, small conversations, close friends. But every time I shared even a piece of what I had experienced, people leaned in. They didn't always understand, but they listened. Something about my eyes, they said. Something had changed. The truth is, I was hungry. Not for food, not for success, but for truth, for God, for the presence I had seen. I didn't want religion, I wanted relationship. I didn't need rituals, I needed reality. I searched through scripture, through testimonies, through moments of solitude where I would sit for hours just to feel close to him again. And sometimes I did, not in visions, not in dreams, but in whispers, in moments so quiet, so personal, they couldn't have come from my own mind. I started to serve, volunteering in places I would have never set foot in before, talking to people I once would have judged, helping where no one was watching, not to earn points, not to escape punishment, but because I had seen what happens when people live for themselves until the very end, and I couldn't bear to be that man again. I forgave people who didn't ask for it, people who had hurt me, people I had hated, not because they deserved it, but because holding on to that bitterness felt like dragging pieces of hell back into the world of the living. And I had had enough of hell. I apologized too, to people I had failed, to those I had abandoned. I wrote letters. I made phone calls. I confessed things I never thought I'd speak aloud. Some people accepted, others didn't. But that wasn't the point. The point was redemption, not external, but internal, a cleansing of the soul. I started living slower, more intentionally. I'd sit with strangers, look them in the eyes, ask real questions, listen, not to respond, but to understand. I stopped judging by appearances, because I now knew we're all closer to the edge than we realize, and we all need grace, more than we're willing to admit. I began to pray, not recite, but pray. Honest, trembling words, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted in the dark. And slowly, I began to recognize his voice again. Not loud, never forceful, but steady, gentle, present. The same voice that wept for me in the depths. The memories didn't fade. They haunted me, yes, but they also grounded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the screams, still feel the heat, still smell the corruption of that place. But most of all, I could still see his face, still feel the weight of his tears. That's what changed me the most. Not the fear of damnation, but the revelation of his love. I saw miracles in small things. Healing in hearts I once thought were too far gone. Restoration in places I once believed were too broken. And while the world around me kept spinning in chaos, I walked through it differently. Not above it, but with new eyes, with eternal perspective. Every soul I encountered felt like someone he would cry for, someone he'd come for, just like he came for me. And so I live now, not to prove anything, not to pretend I'm some spiritual authority. I live to honor the second chance I've been given, to live like someone who has seen the edge and been pulled back. I live because someone wept for me when no one else would. There are nights when I still wake up gasping for air, not because I can't breathe, but because I remember what it was like when my soul couldn't. There are moments, quiet, simple moments, when I pause and feel the weight of it all press against my chest. Not a physical weight, but spiritual. The memory of where I've been, of what I saw, of who stood before me in the deepest part of hell and wept. I carry that memory like a scar carved into the essence of who I am. It doesn't fade, and honestly, I hope it never does, because that scar reminds me, every day, that life isn't just blood and breath. It's choice, it's purpose, it's grace. Sometimes I see people on the street and wonder if they've ever questioned what comes after. I wonder how many of them are too busy, too distracted, too numb to feel the pull of eternity. I wonder how many are carrying invisible wounds, heavy regrets, hidden shame, just like I did. And I want to grab them, shake them, tell them, you don't have to wait until your heart stops beating to wake up. You don't have to reach the edge of hell to realize heaven is calling. But I know how this world works. I know how easy it is to ignore, to push away, to pretend everything's fine, especially when the pain runs deep, especially when your heart has been broken too many times to believe in anything good. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're watching this and thinking, this guy's just emotional because he had a brush with death. Maybe you're skeptical. Maybe you're numb. Maybe you've given up on anything beyond what you can see. But if you've ever felt empty, if you've ever stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m. and wondered if your life actually means something, then maybe this story isn't just a story. Maybe it's your invitation, your interruption, your warning, or maybe your rescue. See, what happened to me wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a spiritual confrontation with everything I refused to face while I was alive. And it changed me. Not because I'm better now, not because I've figured it all out, but because someone loved me enough to step into my hell and cry for me. That changes you. And maybe it's supposed to change you too. You don't have to understand it all. You don't need perfect faith or polished prayers. You don't have to clean yourself up before you come close to God. I sure didn't. I was broken, arrogant, empty, and still, He came. And still, He loved me. And still, He brought me back. I don't share this to scare you. I don't share it to manipulate your emotions. I share it because it happened. Because there are people out there who need to know that the line between this life and the next is thinner than we think. That every day we walk closer to that line. That we all, eventually, face what comes next. And what comes next is real. Hell isn't just fire. It isn't just torment. It's separation. It's the absence of hope. The suffocation of everything that makes life worth living. And heaven? Heaven isn't just clouds and choirs. It's the presence of the one who made you. The one who knows your pain. the one who cries for your soul even now. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a prophet. I'm not here to build a following. I'm just someone who saw the other side and couldn't keep it to himself. And if you've made it this far in the video, maybe you were meant to hear this. Maybe you needed a reminder that there's more, that you're more, that no mistake you've made, no darkness you've entered, no pain you carry is too much for the one who walked into my nightmare, just to show me love. If you've ever felt lost, maybe this story found you for a reason. And if it stirred something in you, anything, then don't walk away from that. Don't scroll past it. Sit with it. Breathe in this moment. Ask yourself the questions you've been too afraid to ask. Because asking might be the beginning of finding. And you're not alone. You never were. I don't know where your story has taken you. I don't know what regrets you carry or what guilt clings to your soul. But I do know this. The same Jesus who cried for me cries for you. The same mercy that pulled me from the pit is reaching out to you now. Not with shame, not with pressure, but with love. So stay with me. This isn't the end of my story, and it doesn't have to be the end of yours either. The next story might change you even more. See you there.